So I've been thinking, people will look at history and look at, medieval times and shit like that, and look at the concept of the jester. And with that, then think, oh, well, the jester was the only person who could make fun of the local lord or the monarch. That was part of their role, was to try to keep them in some form of humility. Because part of their role was to examine the situation and analyze it, but also critique it in a way that was funny. Much in the same context that a lot of times when you're laughing, it's because you're fucking uncomfortable in the situation, but you're relatively safe. Fast forward a few 100 years and a couple decades on top, and then you get to George Carlin, who, instead of being a jester for a king, he was a comedian, obviously, a very good comedian, but he was also examining the situation. And if you noticed what happened to him, after the death of his wife, his comedy stopped having that level of joke hidden in front of it. And he ended up using his platform to promote actual thought and examinations on the situation of the American people. Now, this wasn't the most in-depth analysis, but this was mainly against the governments that were existing, the American government. They also started parading him onto news organizations and berating him for his political and his religious stance, mainly on the idea that, oh, well, you're kind of an idiot because you don't like what there is and you want to remove it. Hell, to my understanding, he is the closest that someone ever got to explaining class dynamics without using the terminology. There's a big club, and you ain't in it. And granted, he was a legend even to this day, how many years after his death. But there are still a lot of people who don't like his comedy and like him as a person, partially because of how he was painted as a whack job for not liking the situation. Because unlike the jesters of yore, instead of targeting his critique of the system and the powers that be toward the powers that be, he targeted his analysis of the powers that be to the masses. They don't like this because they like to have their power be shielded behind this mystique. The fact of the matter is, the powers that be are afraid of the masses. They really are. Otherwise, they wouldn't do so much to propagandize and make fear culture to keep the masses in line. And the fear culture comes in so many ways. Either in the idea of making people be afraid of others through xenophobia that is state-sponsored, through things like, the war on terror, or more directly without having their hand be as visible, because sometimes people can't see a black glove in a shadow, by not doing things like raising minimum wage or keeping the businesses in line for the productivity to wage compensation. I have a little bit of a conspiracy theory that when Trevor Moore died, it wasn't an accident. And the song Kitty History is very much a reason why. But that's a little side note here. This is also part and parcel as to why conservative comedians really aren't funny at all. Because part of what makes comedy really good is an analysis of the situation. Conservatives don't analyze the situation, nor do they want the masses to analyze the situation. So, their comedy stems entirely and ends entirely on the idea of making fun of people who aren't exactly in lockstep with the status quo. People of different ethnicities, people of different political or religious beliefs, women, any marginalized group, really. And don't get me wrong, liberal comedians aren't that much better, because they can only go just far enough before they actually start to feel resistance as they're digging. They're okay if, say, a comedian examines situations of race or situations of sexual inequality or LGBT inequality, but don't ever examine how these things correlate or how they correlate among the lines between worker and owner class. As soon as the jester's target audience was changed to be the masses, their edge of the critique had to be dulled drastically. And knowing this is actually kind of nice in a weird way, because, at least to me, it means that the system as is afraid of the power that we actually do hold as the masses. And they know that the only thing that is truly stopping the masses from taking the reins of power is realizing that the reins are right there. Educate, agitate, and organize. Solidarity.